Hey guys, tonight we are going to slip straight into the sour-scented world of 18th century. Parisian laundry, a place where your precious white linen would get boiled, beaten, and maybe even dyed blue, all in the name of clean. You might think you can handle a bit of dirt, but trust me, you probably wouldn't survive this. Between foul rivers, scalding cauldrons, and half-rotted soap cakes, the humble laundry routine of old Paris would flatten even the toughest. Modern housekeeper Dotso, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, leave a comment with your location and what time it is where you are, because I love seeing how far our little sleepy history community reaches. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the narrow cobblestone alleys of Paris around 1740, balancing a heavy basket of stained linen on your shoulder. The air is clouded with the mingled reek of stale wine, horse droppings, and something worse, maybe rotting fish from the markets nearby. You catch a faint whiff of lye soap too, but let's just say it is a thin veil over all that filth. Laundry. In Paris back then was not the gentle spin of a machine or a sweetly scented pod. It was a week-long struggle. Your linen sheets, once white, had been dulled by months of skin oils, smoke, and grime. There was no daily change of clothes. In fact, most people might only wash their linen underclothes every few weeks if they could afford it. Bed linens, possibly every few months. You shift the basket again, noting the crusted collars and cuffs, stiff with yellow sweat. Historians still argue whether the French population truly cared about hygiene or if they simply cared about linen for its status. After all, visible linen meant you were at least trying to stay clean, a marker of respectability even if you still smelled like a goat. In truth, linen acted almost like a badge, a sign you could afford soap, time, and maybe a laundress. Pass a group of washerwomen gathering near a fountain, their buckets stacked high, wooden sticks slung across their shoulders like medieval spears. They nod at you, a quick greeting, then get back to complaining about how stiff the water is that day, or whether the local merchant tried to cheat them on soap prices again. You hear the splash of water on the stone, see bits of wet straw stuck to their skirts, and realize these women lived elbow-deep in other people's filth for most of their working lives. One young woman pulls a linen shirt from a basket and shakes it hard, sending a small storm of dust and who knows what into the morning light. There's a rhythm to her motions, half muscle, half ritual, like she's been doing this since before she could walk. That's not far from the truth. Washerwomen often started helping as young as 6 or 7, learning how to scrub out the worst of humanity's mess. Overhead, seagulls squawk, hoping for a dropped scrap of bread. Somewhere, a bell tolls, a reminder that time still crawls on even if your wash never seems to end. The Seine wanes through the city, carrying its own stench of fish guts, sewage, and boat fuel. You wonder how many loads of laundry have been dragged through its waters across the centuries, adding another layer to the current. You keep moving, ducking under a clothesline stretched tight between two crooked buildings, nearly catching a damp sheet to the face. The air tastes like metal and coal smoke. This was a place where nothing ever quite dried fully, where the sun fought to break through the soot. You imagine trying to bleach a white chemise here, when half the time even the rain seemed to fall dirty. A woman tries to wave you over. Showing off a scrap of cloth she claims she can rescue from a wine stain with a special blend of lye and pigeon droppings. You raise an eyebrow but hold your tongue. Who knows? In 18th century Paris, that might be the best option you have. Past the fountain, a heavy wooden door swings open and out comes a merchant carrying yet another basket of stained linens. He pays the laundresses in copper coins, pinched and careful, grumbling about the price. You catch a glimpse of a pair of embroidered cuffs, so fine they must belong to someone with status, but stained in a way that tells a quiet story of spilled sauce or a long, sweaty dance. That's the curious thing about linen back then. It revealed everything. The class you belonged to, the stains you couldn't hide, even the smells you carried with you. Linen was your silent confession to the world, both shield and evidence. You step inside a cramped washhouse where steam clings to the ceiling, thick and damp. A couple of dogs sleep in the corner, completely unconcerned with the stink. The floors are slick, a dangerous place to slip. You take a moment, breathing the sour air, and prepare to drop your basket by a vacant bench, ready to take your turn in the long, eternal war against dirt. And maybe, just maybe, you settle your basket down, stretching your shoulders as you take in the battlefield of soap, steam, and sweat before you. Nearby, an older washerwoman, sleeves rolled high above her elbows, works a bar of soap so harsh it could probably peel paint. It smells of animal fat and ashes, gritty enough to scratch your knuckles raw. This, dear listener, is the famed 18th century Parisian lye soap. A powerful yet brutal cleaning tool. It might sound silly to you, but back then, soap wasn't an art form, or perhaps a war crime against the skin. The recipe called for rendered animal fats, mixed with strong lye made from potash or wood ashes, boiled down until it formed a crumbly white cake. Historians still argue whether these early soap makers perfected the formula or simply learned to tolerate the burns. Either way, you can practically taste the sharp, acrid scent in the air. A woman across the way scrapes a grayish block with a knife, sprinkling the shavings into a bucket of steaming water. The heat releases a smell like scorched bacon mixed with something sour, and you can't help but wrinkle your nose. She laughs and tells you this is the best soap in the neighborhood. Don't mind if it takes a layer of skin off with the fan off. Dirt. You get closer, helping swirl the water with a wooden paddle. It bubbles with a greasy foam, swirling bits of old straw and lint like a tiny stew of forgotten filth. The soap sticks to your hands, and no matter how much you rinse, there's a sense it will follow you all day, a film of stinging sharpness that even river water can't truly wash away. There are local stories of housewives passing down secret soap recipes, one including a splash of vinegar and leftover goose fat to make the lye less caustic. Another claims mixing wood ash with rosemary made the soap more pleasant, though historians still debate if that was true or just wishful thinking. You picture a proud matron stirring a pot of stinking soap with a wooden spoon, nodding in satisfaction at her cauldron of semi-toxic miracle paste. You move to the next tub, where another washerwoman is scrubbing a chemise so hard the seams threaten to split. She tosses more soap into the water with a look of determination that could put a knight to shame. Clothes here were not gently laundered. They were conquered, forced back to a semblance of white through sheer aggression. You pick up a shirt stiff with dried sweat and ash. The cloth is rough, coarse linen that could sand your cheek if you tried to sleep on it. Dipping it into the foamy water feels like dunking a rag into a hot swamp. But there's a strange satisfaction in watching the yellowish water slowly swirl away, leaving a hint of pale white behind. Suddenly a young apprentice trips near you, sending a bar of lye soap skittering across the floor like a puck on ice. Everyone laughs, though one woman reminds him, only half joking, that this soap costs as nearly as much as a dinner loaf. Nothing got wasted here. Soap scraps were saved, melted down again, even traded with neighbors. If you owned a bar of soap, you guarded it like a miser guards his coin purse. You might think soap should smell nice. Not so in 18th century Paris. A sweet-smelling soap was rare and reserved for the highest classes, perfumed with imported oils like lavender or bergamot. For everyone else, soap smelled like boiled pigskin with a hint of ashes. a scent you'd never find bottled in any modern boutique. You hear a story from one of the laundresses about a neighbor who tried to make soap using leftover sheep brains, believing it would soften the linen. Apparently, the smell was so horrific the entire block complained, and she had to burn the whole batch. Historians still argue whether such soap ever worked, or if this was just a cautionary legend meant to warn curious novices. Either way, you. Hope no one repeats that experiment tonight. Steam billows from the copper pots where water is heated to dissolve the soap shavings, and your skin grows clammy. It clings to your sleeves, carrying that odd perfume of scorched fat and sharp alkali. You can almost imagine the soap etching away stains the way acid eats through iron. Unstoppable and uncaring dot as the washerwomen work, they sing softly, half to keep rhythm, half to keep their minds off the stinging on their hands. The songs are repetitive, simple verses about the joys of clear water, the trials of spilled wine, and the impossible hope of a linen sheet returning to its once pristine shine. There is something soothing in their voices, even if their arms ache. You dunk a small towel into the lye soup and feel the heat bite through your glove. You move slowly, cautiously, trying to copy their confident rhythm, but your modern instincts scream at you. You would probably not survive 2 hours doing this, let alone a lifetime. The soap bubbles swirl and pop like tiny, angry voices, and you realize that for the 18th century washer, you pause to rub the sting from your fingers, letting the heat from the steaming copper vat wrap around you like a damp, smelly hug. Ahead, a washerwoman carefully balances a heavy iron kettle of water, tipping it slowly into another tub. The water is almost at a rolling boil, threatening to scorch anything that dares enter. And that, dear listener, is exactly the point dot in 18th century Paris. Boiling was practically holy. You could call it the ultimate purging of filth, a scalding. Baptism for cloth that had been through weeks, sometimes months, of sweat, dust, and who knows what else. Bed sheets, chemises, breeches, even tablecloths all took their turn in the copper cauldron. You might wonder why they didn't just scrub with cold water. Historians still argue whether hot water truly sanitized fabrics or merely gave people a sense of moral victory, but there's no doubt that the boiling process seemed deeply satisfying. It worked as a visible, steamy promise of pure. Of course, the smell was another matter. The stench that rose from a cauldron of boiled linen was enough to fell a strong horse. It carried the tang of scorched sweat, rancid skin oil, left over, lye soap, and whatever random dirt had been worked into the weave. You pinch your nose, fighting the urge to gag, as the steam hits you like a slap. One washerwoman, elbow deep in this putrid brew, grins at you with a kind of battle-hardened pride. She explains how the boil sets the soap deeper into the cloth, helping it break down the worst stains. The linen then gets pulled out with a long wooden paddle, dripping hot water, before being transferred to a second rinse tub, which, let's be honest, is barely cleaner than the first. You reach for a paddle, the wood slick with years of use. A faint black ring marks how far the water usually rises, and you wonder how many sleeves have been scorched in its scalding depths. A few apprentices gather to watch, their eyes wide as they learn to swirl and lift without splashing themselves. No one wants to end up with a scalded wrist. After all, one woman laughs as she pulls a particularly filthy sheet from the copper, scolding it as though it were a misbehaving child. Next time stay cleaner, eh? She jokes, then dunks it back. And with a satisfying splash, you can see the threads straining against the paddle, as if the cloth itself wants to flee the heat. Sometimes they added a pinch of vinegar or even salt to the water, believing it would draw out the yellow in old linen. Historians still debate whether that truly worked or just made everyone feel better about the process. You picture a proud washer tossing a handful of salt like a medieval witch casting a protective spell, certain it would defend against dingy cuffs and collars. There's a rhythmic beauty to it. Scoop, swirl, scold, rinse. Scoop, swirl, scold, rinse. You fall into that pattern, hypnotized by the swirl of linen, the hiss of steam, the musical clang of the iron cauldron being lifted on its hook. If you let your mind wander, you might almost forget how miserable the stench is, how much your arms ache, how raw your skin feels. A fringe note from a faded laundry manual mentions adding a sprig of thyme or rosemary to the pot, not for cleaning, but to calm the linen spirit. Whether anyone truly believed a shirt had a soul is up for debate, but the idea is weirdly charming. Maybe even a sheet deserves a bit of kindness before it goes through the scalding water. One apprentice gets scolded for lifting a linen too early, leaving a ghost of a stain behind. The senior washer shakes her head, clucking like a mother hen. In her world, half clean is worse than dirty because it means you wasted your soap, your time, and your dignity. And dignity for these laundresses was precious. Their skill meant status, meant a place among the other working women, meant the trust of their employers. You try to move in closer, breathing through your mouth as best you can. The hot, sticky air weighs down on you and sweat trickles down. You're back despite the chill outside. A pigeon perches on the rafters above, feathers ruffling, as if even it can't stand the smell rising from the boiling tubs. As you help lift out another shirt. Steam whips around you like a curtain, hiding everything in a fog. There's something almost comforting in that, the sense of being inside a secret, hidden world where the rules of the street no longer apply and nothing exists but water, heat, and hard-earned elbow grease. You lean against a post for a moment, catching your breath, while a washerwoman slices away a stray thread from a fraying sleeve. She works with the quiet confidence of someone who has boiled thousands of garments. You suspect she could do it in her sleep, and probably has. Scalding routine ends at last, with the rinse water turning a shade of gray you never imagined possible. But to these women, that cloudy swirl means victory. Another basket beaten back from the filth. Outside, the bells toll again, a reminder of how many hours slip by between sunrise and the moment a shirt emerges white, or at least less brown. You ease away from the steam-choked room, blinking your eyes clear as you step back into the half-light of an 18th-century Parisian lane. From here, you follow the path of the washerwomen to the riverbank, the Seine, wide and slow, its surface, shimmering in places and murky in others, carrying a stench you can taste on the air. The river is where the real magic or madness happens. You see rows of women lined up along the edge, perched on creaking wooden planks that extend into the Chi-Hongden water. They swing their arms with the precision of lifelong practice, dunking, swirling, then smacking the linens against worn stone slabs to drive out what soap and boiling could not. Historians still argue whether this harsh river washing was worth it, since the Seine was, well, far from pristine. It carried waste from tanneries, runoff from butcher shops, raw sewage, and everything else that a city of 500,000 souls might toss over the side. In short, the Seine was a filthy broth. Yet here they stood, year after year, trusting its current to rinse away the final traces of dirt. You watch a stout woman in a russet dress grab a heavy linen shift, swirl it through the water, and then whip it with a sharp crack against the stone block. Again and again, the wet cloth smacks down, echoing like a drumbeat through the morning mist. It's oddly hypnotic, rhythmic, even peaceful, until you remember what's swirling around their ankles. The washerwomen ignore the stink, ignoring the floating bits of who knows what, focused instead on working the river's chill through every fiber of the cloth. They have a fierce pride about it, as if to say, we can conquer any stain, no matter what the river throws at us. One jokes that the Seine's filth is so strong, it frightens the dirt away from the linen. You can't tell if she's being Sarcastic, but you laugh anyway. Nearby, an apprentice helps push a wicker basket back from the water's edge, careful not to let it slip into the current. He shivers, the damp creeping up his sleeves as he tries to balance clean clothes next to water so filthy it could grow its own ecosystem. As you edge closer, you spot a small blue cloth tied to a wooden pole. This is a wash marker, a way to stake out territory. No one wants to fight for a spot once they've claimed it. In this city, a laundress's patch of river was as valuable as a landlord's field. That patch of water might be full of sewage, but to her, it was the final rinse for a week's worth of wages. You kneel down, dipping a rag into the Seine for yourself. The water feels shockingly cold, biting through your gloves. Goosebumps prick along your arms, and you can practically feel every single unsavory particle clinging to your skin. But when you wring the rag out, it does look cleaner, in a relative sense. Anyway, one of the older women watches you with a half grin. She tells you they always say a blessing before they rinse, a kind of medieval insurance policy so the river spirits don't steal away the whiteness of the cloth. Historians still debate whether that blessing had a pagan root or was just a comforting superstition. You kind of like the idea that a bit of whispered magic might help when soap and boiling water had already given up. A young girl, no more than 12, beats a child's chemise against a flat rock, singing under her breath to keep the rhythm. Her voice is soft, but clear, carrying across the water as if the Seine itself is listening. You notice her hands, chapped and red, with tiny cracks where lye soap has bitten through skin. You feel your own knuckles ache just watching. In the distance, the dome of a church cuts through the haze, its bells tolling the hour, a reminder that even holiness has to share the riverside with the wash. Swans glide past, regal and completely unfazed by the chaos. You catch a waft of rotting fish, woven together with the metallic tang of old blood from slaughterhouses upstream. The women hardly flinch. They work with a sense of ritual, a rhythm. That goes back generations. There's a feeling that these banks have seen more secrets than any palace. Dirty sheets that hinted at affairs, children's linen stained by illness, the uniforms of soldiers returning from war, all of it came here to be forgiven, in a sense, beaten against a rock and released to the river's indifferent flow. 1. Washer stops to stretch, back cracking like a ship's mast in a storm. She rubs her lower spine, then reaches to fix the kerchief holding back her hair. You can see every movement is a testament to years of practice, a fierce confidence that no modern laundry detergent could ever replace. And then, for a moment, the sun breaks through a low gap in the clouds, catching droplets as they fly off. Swinging linens. It sparkles across the river like a string of tiny stars, turning the filth. You stand there for a while, letting the sun's shimmer fade back into gray, and then follow the washerwomen as they wring out their battered linens. One woman holds up a sheet that looks white from a distance, but under closer inspection, still bears the faint shadows of ancient stains. She sighs and shrugs. It's good enough for a Parisian household. Then, as if by secret code, several of them pull small bundles from their baskets. You look closer, curious, and realize they're holding packets of deep blue powder wrapped in paper. This is indigo, imported at a high cost, and it is the finishing touch to the illusion of clean. Historians still argue whether this bluing method actually improved whiteness or simply tricked the human eye, but one thing is certain, it worked. The blue tint counteracted the yellow, making the linen appear crisper, purer, even if deep down the dirt still clung. You watch a washerwoman sprinkle a pinch of this powder into a bucket of water, stirring it with a worn stick until the mixture glows a faint turquoise. Then she dunks the cloth in, soaking it thoroughly before pulling it out and wringing it again. The result is a pale, subtle blue-white that somehow fools everyone into believing in perfection. She holds up the cloth with, a proud grin, daring anyone to see through the trick. You can't help but chuckle at the cleverness and perhaps the desperation that gave rise to this practice. People cared so deeply about appearances. Even in a city that reeked of sewage and sweat, they would blue their linens to appear richer, neater, more dignified. You catch a whiff of the indigo as it floats on the air, a faint earthy note mixed with something sharp. The powder clings to your nose for a moment, a tickle that makes you sneeze. One of the women laughs at your confusion, telling you a good bluing means a good house, and a good house means good luck. Who could argue with that logic? Nearby, a teenage apprentice tries to measure out the powder with a shaking hand, afraid of staining the linen too blue. One mistake, and a nobleman's precious tablecloth might come out looking like a smock for a tavern maid, an insult no laundress wanted to risk. The girl takes a deep breath, then lets the pale swirl of blue settle around the fabric with practiced patience. You lean in, noticing how each cloth is judged as much by its final color as by its scent or texture. A properly blued piece of linen was prized, a subtle signal of wealth. It told neighbors, friends, and even gossipy visitors that you were refined enough to fuss over a detail as small as tone. Historians still debate if bluing was imported from Persia or adapted from medieval dyeing practices closer to home. Either way, it became a French obsession by the 18th century. Some claimed a tiny dot of blue gave a sheet a sky-kissed look, as if the heavens themselves had blessed your wash. You help swirl a chemise through the pale blue water, noting how the fabric seems to shimmer almost magically despite its years of wear. You wonder how many times these same clothes had been blued, rinsed, beaten, boiled, and yet still survived. There's a strange sense of pride in their resilience. Even as they hang limp in your hands next to you, a laundress carefully folds a blued napkin, tucking it under a stack as though handling the crown jewels. She smiles, eyes crinkling, and shares a quiet joke about how some ladies of the household insisted on bluing their undergarments too, as if a suitor might peek under their skirts and judge them by the color of their petticoats. You snort, nearly losing your grip on the stick. Some old treatises, she says, advise dipping baby linens in blue water to help calm the spirits of infants. Whether it was superstition or not, you can picture a worried mother rocking her newborn in a soft blue blanket, hoping for peace. It's hard not to feel charmed by that little bit of folklore. The wind shifts and sends a gust of fresh air across the water, stirring the drying lines, snapping the edges of cloth in a gentle applause. You pause, letting that fresh breeze clear your nose of the indigo tang, and watch as the washerwomen start to pin their blued sheets to the lines, anchoring them with simple wooden pegs. The lines stretch from one creaking post to another, dancing lightly with the movement of the wind. Each fluttering cloth is a small flag of triumph, a banner saying, "We survived another laundry day." You can almost imagine the city taking a collective breath, comforted by the sight of fresh linen, no matter how briefly it might stay clean. You move closer, helping a young girl straighten a corner of a damp chemise, the blue barely perceptible but giving the cloth an almost regal glow. She thanks you shyly, and for a moment, you feel like you belong here, sharing this tiny miracle of turning grime into grace. And so, you stand back, the blue water still swirling behind you, and watch the last sheet ripple in the sun. Clean? You linger by the lines, letting the damp cloth brush against your knuckles as it flutters in the breeze. There's something gentle in that motion, a kind of lullaby for the city, even if you know the stories hidden in those folds would keep most people awake. But soon, the women get ready for the next step. Perfuming. If you think a proper wash ended with soap and blue water, think again. Parisian laundresses took their craft to new heights, determined to mask the stink of boiled lye and river filth with something a little more refined. Out come the sachets, tiny cloth pouches filled with crushed lavender, rosemary, and dried rose petals, sometimes even scented with a splash of vinegar. One woman holds a linen sheet high, snapping it in the breeze before tucking a lavender pouch between the folds. You watch, amused, as she smooths it carefully like a treasured quilt. Historians still argue whether these floral sachets truly made a difference or simply gave people false comfort. But there's no question it made everyone feel more civilized. You catch the faintest whiff of lavender, a sleepy, soft perfume that almost masks the sour bite of soap. Almost. You can still sense a tang of boiled fat and river silt lurking beneath. But in this moment, the sachets give everyone a chance to pretend they are surrounded by gardens rather than a stew of sewage and grime. One apprentice dips her fingers into a vinegar jar, sprinkling it across a pile of folded napkins. It seems odd at first. Why would you perfume with vinegar? But she explains vinegar was believed to kill fleas, and in a city where rats carried plague only a generation ago, no one was about to take chances. You smile, thinking it is better to smell faintly pickled than to risk another round of scratching. There is even a ritual here, a hushed choreography. A folded sheet, a sachet tucked in, a sprinkle of vinegar along the seam, then a gentle press. With a warm iron, it is a kind of dance, a last blessing before the linen returns to its master's household. Watching it unfold feels almost sacred, a prayer to the gods of fresh laundry. You run your finger across a finished linen square. Still damp, its fibers smoother than you expected. The floral scent tickles your nose, layered on top of a hint of vinegar so sharp it makes your eyes water. You wonder if this really counts as clean, but looking around, you see the pride on their faces, and that alone makes the effort worthwhile. A group of women gather near a doorway, chatting about which flowers work best for scenting linen. One swears by marigold, another by rosemary, another by something called angelica, though you've never even seen it. They laugh about a neighbor who tried to perfume her sheets with slices of lemon, only to discover the cloth turned yellow. You nearly giggle yourself at the thought, a well-meaning mistake that might have ruined an entire wedding trousseau. A passing noblewoman pauses to praise the fresh scent, dropping a few copper coins in a basket. The laundresses beam, even curtsy a little, soaking up the compliment. It might be the only reward they get today apart from sore arms and chapped knuckles. You look down again at the vinegar-damp linen, thinking how curious it is that these old traditions still feel oddly familiar. After all, don't modern folks still spray their bedsheets with lavender oil? Maybe centuries change, but the longing for clean, cozy sleep is eternal. One woman shows you a tiny scrap of cloth soaked in rose water, explaining it's saved for the highest-ranking garments, petticoats, lace caps, sometimes even a bishop's ceremonial robe. The rose water is precious, imported, rare, a few copper coins for a spoonful. But to perfume cloth with it is the ultimate flex, a fragrant brag that says, I can afford roses even for my laundry. You can practically smell the status, sweet and ephemeral, floating across the courtyard as women work. Rose water becomes a tiny rebellion against dirt, against drudgery, against the world itself. Historians still debate whether perfuming laundry had any health benefit or if it was pure vanity, but it is clear that it offered hope, a bright sun. In a dark century, a way to keep nightmares away and welcome sweeter dreams. You help one apprentice gather the perfumed linens into a wicker basket, layered so carefully they look like a stack of flower petals. The basket itself smells like sunshine, a gentle reminder that no matter how filthy the wash began, the result could feel like a blessing. A warm breeze rolls through again, picking up a scrap of perfumed cloth and sending it fluttering across the stones. The women laugh, chasing it, rescuing it before it tumbles into a puddle. The moment feels human, silly, and gentle. A small break from the endless work of conquering dirt. And as you follow a group of washerwomen down toward the water's edge again, where they take up thick wooden paddles, their handles worn smooth from years of use. These, dear listener, are their beating poles, the tools of choice for some of the fiercest stain removal the world has ever seen. The process is half washing, half punishment. They dunk the linen in water, then lay it across a flat rock or a raised stone slab and start pounding it with a force that would impress any blacksmith. The beaters come down again and again, thumping in a rhythmic chorus that echoes through the narrow alleys. One of the older women catches your startled glance and laughs, telling you stains are stubborn, and sometimes a good beating is the only way to teach them a lesson. You smile at the joke but watch with wide eyes as the blows rain down on the cloth. A faint mist of droplets sparkles around the edges of the stone, catching the morning sun like tiny prisms. Historians still argue whether beating really improved cleanliness or just made the washer feel better, but there's no doubt it did something. The fibers seemed to release their grime better under this punishment, and a properly beaten linen had a certain limp, worn softness that was considered comfortable. You see one apprentice wince as she misjudges the swing of her paddle and catches her knuckles on the slab. A quick yelp, then back to work. Bruises and splinters were simply part of the job. The poles themselves could splinter after months of pounding, leaving tiny shards that dug into already chapped hands. Nearby, a laundress hefts a paddle taller, then her arm, and brings it down with a satisfying thwack, splattering droplets across the stone. You jump back, narrowly missing the spray. She just shrugs and says, "Better the linen suffer than the customer." There is a ritual to this too. 1, 2, 3, flip, and again. A strange dance of violence and precision, learned over years, repeated hundreds of times until it becomes second nature. You hear women counting under their breath, singing quiet songs to keep the rhythm steady. It's almost hypnotic, like a lullaby with a hard edge. A fringe note in an old guild manual even claimed that beating cloth helped drive out evil humors. Whether that was medical theory or a bit of marketing, no one really knows. But you can easily picture a laundress whacking away at a chemise while mumbling a prayer against bad luck. As if beating the cloth could beat away a curse, you help hold a corner of linen while an older woman smacks the other side. The vibrations travel through the fabric, up your arms, rattling your bones in a way that feels both alarming and oddly satisfying. You wonder if this was part of the reason these washerwomen stayed so strong, their arms as solid as oak branches. Sometimes, they dipped the cloth in a vinegar rinse after the beating, hoping the acid would set the whiteness. The smell of vinegar tangles with the whetstone scent, leaving your nose half confused, half comforted. You wonder if future generations might look back on this moment and marvel at how anyone ever thought it worked out. One of the apprentices glances over and shows off a rip in a sleeve, a casualty of overzealous beating. She sighs, then starts patching it with a bit of linen thread, using the paddle itself as a hard surface to brace against. Nothing got wasted. Everything was fixed, repaired, and sent back into battle. The sun climbs higher, glinting off the water, and the rhythm of the paddle speeds up. A flock of pigeons scatter as another crack echoes through the courtyard. You feel the energy of the moment, an odd pride in this fierce, determined work. You take a step back, wiping a splash from your cheek, and breathe in that mixed perfume of wet linen, vinegar, and river mud. Somehow it feels honest. The laundresses don't pretend to be delicate, nor do they apologize for their work. They take filthy cloth and hammer it clean, and no one can say otherwise. A small breeze teases the edge of a drying sheet, sending it dancing along the line, and you catch a glimpse of the washerwomen's faces, tired, yes, but proud. They know their skill, their strength, and their place in this city's story. Even if all of Paris forgot them tomorrow, the work would go on, steady as a heartbeat. You stand among them, you set the paddle aside, stretching your hands, which already feel raw from just holding it. One of the older women, hands toughened like leather, notices your discomfort and gives you a knowing smile. She shows you the countless tiny scars. Across her knuckles, badges of a laundress's battle, she calls them, though there's nothing glamorous about it, because Parisian laundry in the 1700s was dangerous, not just tiring. The harsh lye, the boiling water, the filthy river. All of it could leave permanent marks on a body. And then there were the splinters. The wooden paddles, the baskets, even the washboards all carried rough spots waiting to pierce your skin. Historians still argue whether laundry injuries were a kind of quiet epidemic among washerwomen or just one more hardship in a world that didn't spare working hands. But here, you can see the truth written plainly across scarred fingers and stiff wrists. You watch a girl maybe 14 years old, sleeves rolled back to the elbows, wincing as she dips her hands into a lye-soaked tub. Her skin flushes red instantly, raw from yesterday's soap, and she tries not to cry. The older washer by her side hands her a salve made of animal fat and beeswax, a homemade barrier. You wonder if it helps at all, or if it just stings in a different way. A woman nearby shows off a chunk of hardened callus that's nearly as thick as leather. She jokes it's better than any glove, though, she adds, she wouldn't mind. Proper pair of gloves if only she could afford them. You laugh softly with her, even as you notice her nails are cracked and darkened from years of soaking in ash-laden water. One fringe story floating around the wash house says that women sometimes wash their hands in stale milk after work, hoping it would soften their cracked skin. Historians still debate whether that trick worked or if it was simply a hopeful myth, but you can picture someone carefully pouring a clay jug of leftover milk across bruised, battered knuckles, praying for relief. Then there were the accidents. No salve could soothe. Slips on wet stone, burns from spilling boiling water, and of course the ever-present danger of infections. Even a minor scratch could fester. One washer tells you about a neighbor who lost half her thumb after a splinter. Went bad. You wince, instinctively curling your own hands into a safer place. Beyond the physical wounds, there were the aches that never quite healed. Stiff shoulders from lifting copper pots, lower back pain from endless bending, knees that clicked every time they rose from scrubbing. These were the unspoken prices paid for a cloth that looked respectable, for a household that wanted its guests to marvel at snow-white table linens. Yet despite the pain, the women joke and tease one another as they work, splashing water back and forth, sharing stories of sweethearts and petty neighbors. There is a sort of solidarity here, a small sisterhood made strong by repetition and need. You can sense it, that soft bond holding them upright through the worst days. One of the older women leans on her paddle like a staff, telling you about a time she burned her forearm so badly that it left a scar shaped like a fish. Now, whenever anyone asks, she claims it's a sailor's tattoo. Better a silly tale than pity. You grin, touched by her spark. A pigeon struts across the stone walkway, bold as a prince, pecking at crumbs dropped by someone's lunch. The women don't shoo it away. They seem to welcome its company. One more creature who lives by the rhythms of the wash house. You wonder what the pigeon makes of all this splashing and beating, of the human drama swirling around it. You catch sight of a small shrine wedged into the wall, a crude wooden Virgin Mary barely protected by a chipped bit of glass. Someone has tied a ragged piece of ribbon around her neck, a silent plea for safety. You imagine how many hands have paused to whisper a prayer before plunging back into the water and soap. As the afternoon sun creeps across the washstones, the place grows quieter, the rhythm slowing. Women wring out the last linens for the day, their shoulders drooping, their eyes glazed from hours of steam and labor. You watch one apprentice kneel to sweep away a pile of damp straw, carefully gathering. Up stray threads to reuse. Nothing goes to waste, not a scrap, not a minute. And through it all, you sense their pride. These marks on their hands, these tired backs, they are medals of a kind. Proof they belong to a trade that kept Parisian households looking just civilized enough to face the world. You breathe deeply. You wander to a smaller corner of the washhouse where a group of peasants huddle around a battered table. Their baskets look different from the fancier loads you've seen all morning: stained trousers, patched underclothes, ragged kerchiefs, marked by soot and soil. These are the clothes of people who cannot afford guild-approved washerwomen, who must manage with homemade tricks and odd, handed-down remedies. They open a crock of something that smells a bit off, sour, and curdled. One woman, with a quick grin, explains it is stale milk. Historians still argue whether this was clever chemistry or a superstition, but here in this humble corner, it is gospel. Stale milk, they claim, helps draw out wine stains. You raise an eyebrow but keep silent. They have no money for soap, so sour milk will have to do. One man, sleeves rolled up to his shoulders, rubs the milk into a sleeve stiff with spilled stew. The creamy liquid seeps into the cloth, leaving an odd white glaze. He shrugs and says it's better than nothing. You can't help but admire that determination to make do. Nearby, a girl no older than 8 sprinkles a handful of pale clay over a stubborn grass stain on her brother's breeches. Clay was another folk remedy, praised for absorbing oil, though historians still debate if it truly worked or just made everyone feel they were trying their best. You picture peasants digging clay out of riverbanks, pinching off a lump and tucking it away for next week's washing day. A basket holds scraps of soap too small to scrub with. These have been boiled down into a mush, then dried again into rough, gritty lumps. The peasants share them out like candy, each taking a bit home, a tiny treasure. You can feel their gratitude, even if the soap will scrape their knuckles raw. One older woman talks about green soap, a harsh homemade blend of oil and ashes that stay soft and sticky. It smells rancid, but it is precious, the best they can manage. She rubs it onto a chemise with slow, resigned strokes, singing to herself as though the music might sweeten the stink. A young mother, balancing. A toddler on her hip shows you a linen square she's patched at least a dozen times. The corners are fraying, but she refuses to throw it away. "This was my wedding cloth," she says, with pride shining through. You trace the rough stitches, seeing how love and memory can live in even the humblest scrap of fabric. There's a strange beauty in how these peasant families share knowledge. They talk about staying cures the way city people might discuss a doctor's prescription. A drop of sour beer for blood, stale milk for wine, ash for grease, a pinch of salt for grass. You listen as they argue about proportions, each convinced. Their grandmother's recipe is the best. One boy tries to brighten a dull shirt by brushing it with raw potato slices. His grandmother insists the starch helps wake up the color. You almost laugh, but hold it in. In their world, even the humblest trick is worth a try. Sometimes these makeshift techniques worked, and sometimes they made things worse. One apprentice tells a story about how her cousin once ruined a precious white apron by soaking it in brine meant for pickled herring. The apron came out smelling like a fishmonger's stall for weeks. Historians still debate if brine ever helped remove stains or if it was a desperate act born of sheer frustration. As the peasants rinse their patched clothes, the river water barely changes color. They have no soap left to wash out, no bluing. Powder to transform dull linen. Still, they scrub with determination, leaning into every motion as if fighting to defend their dignity. You can feel their struggle. This laundry is about survival, about squeezing another year from a sleeve, another. month from a baby's gown, another day from an apron. These hands, bruised and cracked, have learned the art of coaxing one more use out of every thread. One woman dabs a tear from her cheek, laughing that she is crying over soap, not because it's scarce, but because it is precious. That moment catches in your throat, a quiet testament to the value of what we now take for granted. The sun is starting to dip, painting the edges of the wash house in soft gold. Peasants gather their damp, oddly scented, but at least somewhat cleaner clothes, wrapping them in bundles of rough linen. They hold their heads high, proud that they have done their best. You shift your weight from foot to foot, feeling a strange kind of respect bloom inside you for these everyday warriors of soap and steam. Yet for all their skill with paddles and vinegar, there was one final magic trick they prized above all. Starch. You watch a group of women crowd around a low table where a bubbling pot of starchy water simmers, thick and milky. They carefully stir it, testing its stickiness with calloused fingers. This is the lifeblood of a truly proper linen finish. It gives collars their proud, stiff edge, makes cuffs sharp enough to slice a stray hair, and helps an apron stand up almost on its own. The starch comes from wheat or rice, sometimes from crushed potatoes if times were lean. Historians still argue whether rice starch made cloth crisper than wheat, but either way, these women saw it as a miracle worker. A starched ruffle could transform the humblest peasant into someone respectable or make a fine lady's gown look worthy of a royal ballroom. You lean in as one woman dips a napkin into the warm starch, then carefully smooths it flat, working the liquid deep into the weave. The cloth emerges from the pot looking damp and limp, but once dried and pressed, it will hold its shape like iron. There's an odd beauty in how something so simple, a bit of paste, could carry so much social weight. Another washerwoman sets out a lace collar on a wicker rack, brushing starch across its delicate loops with a soft feather. You're amazed she dares, but she explains there is no finer sign of a good house than a crisp lace collar, even if it makes moving your neck nearly impossible. You grin, picturing someone trying to nod politely with their chin pinned like a wooden puppet. One young apprentice tries to starched petticoat, dipping it, then wringing it out with a look of total concentration. She flinches as a bit of hot starch splashes on her wrist, but the older women only laugh gently. Pain is part of the price for perfection, they say. You help smooth out a tablecloth, running your hands across the sticky cloth, feeling the starch already beginning to stiffen. It clings to your palms, gritty, almost alive. A breeze tugs at the cloth's edge, rattling it like a sheet of parchment. Some stories from this era talk about people starched their bed linens, trying to impress guests who might glimpse them. Historians still debate whether that was practical or absurd. After all, who wants to sleep on something as stiff as a board? But the practice was real, part of a culture where hospitality was judged by even the smallest detail. You catch a whiff of vinegar again as another woman folds a starched shift, the sour note still clinging from earlier rinses. Layered with lavender, the scent is oddly comforting, a strange Parisian perfume that signals clean. Someone sets a heavy flat iron on the stove, getting ready to press the newly starched cloth. You watch the iron heat up, its face going from dull to bright. A whiff of scorching linen rises as the first shirt is pressed, the iron hissing with each motion. You can feel the heat from where you stand, sharp and dry against your cheeks. The woman wielding the iron moves with practiced grace, flattening pleats and setting perfect creases with a flick of her wrist. The cloth obeys, freezing in its new shape like a soldier at attention. You sense her pride as she holds up the finished piece, gleaming under the soft glow of the washhouse lamp. Someone jokes about starch so strong it could stand up on its own, like a linen ghost haunting the hall. You laugh with them, letting that gentle, silly humor soften the harshness of the day. One apprentice maybe no older than 12, is trusted with brushing starch across a gentleman's cravat. Her hands shake, but she steadies them with a deep breath. You can see in her eyes how serious this feels, as if she's holding a bit of someone's social reputation in her fingers. Outside, you hear the distant rumble of a carriage going by, a reminder that while the city above goes on in its swirl of silk and candles, these laundresses fight their daily battle with soap, starch, and elbow grease. You pause, running your own hand across a stiffened cuff, marveling at how something once filthy could stand so proudly after all this work. Starch might make the cloth uncomfortable, but it also made it respectable. And in the harsh gaze of 18th century Paris, respect was everything. As the women chatter about tomorrow's loads, you feel the strange comfort of routine settle over. You stand for a moment, admiring the crisp folds that the starch has sculpted, before turning your attention to another ritual that feels almost like wizardry: ironing. In 18th century Paris, an iron was no sleek, Teflon-coated gadget. It was a hefty cast-iron beast that had to be filled with smoldering coals or placed directly on the stove to heat. Dangerous and temperamental in equal measure. A washerwoman nearby handles it with the steady hands of a surgeon, flicking a splash of water onto the iron's face to check its temperature. If it sizzles too quickly, it's too hot and could scorch. Delicate linen instantly. You hold your breath, imagining how one slip of this blazing weight could undo. Days of back-breaking scrubbing. The woman places the iron on a thick folded cloth to cool it just enough, then starts pressing a freshly starched chemise. The steam rises in gentle puffs, scented with vinegar and lavender, a Parisian perfume if there ever was one. Each stroke takes the fabric from rumpled to proud, one smooth pass at a time. You notice her wrists, knotted with muscle, a testament to a lifetime of steady, repetitive work. Historians still argue whether ironing was harder than the washing itself, given how easily you could ruin a garment at the final stage. But either way, it was as essential as any beating pole or soap. Caked out across the room, an apprentice clutches a lighter iron, the smaller gaffering style meant for lace and fine pleats. Its face is shaped almost like a narrow canoe, perfect for slipping between rows of delicate ruffles. She moves carefully, terrified she burn a lady's prized collar. Her teacher stands close, murmuring a quiet reminder: always keep moving. Never let the iron rest in one place. There is a soft musical hiss from another heavy iron nearby, a lullaby of hot metal and cloth. You find yourself drifting into its rhythm, the scrape and thump of ironing boards blending with the distant toll of church bells from somewhere across the river. One fringe tale you overhear involves a laundress who swore by sprinkling white wine on shirts before pressing them, claiming it gave the linen a certain shine and preserved the fibers. Historians still debate if this was genius or wasteful nonsense, but you can picture someone defending their secret recipe with all the confidence in the world. There is also the smell. You cannot escape it. Hot starch faintly burning. Cloth, a thread of lavender, even the faint copper tang of the stove. It blends into a scent you would never bottle, yet somehow feels warm and familiar, like an old family kitchen. You help hold a sleeve while the iron glides over it, marveling at how the wrinkled cloth seems to surrender under heat, relaxing into perfect lines. There is something deeply satisfying about seeing a garment stand tall and neat, reborn from its weeks of grime and sweat. But this task comes with risk. One woman shows you the scar on her thumb, a faint shiny line where she grabbed the irons. Handle too soon. She shrugs, saying at least she didn't burn through the Lord's ruffled nightshirt. That would have cost her more than a scar. You laugh gently with her, even as you wince. The apprentices share warnings about overheating the starch, about creasing a collar the wrong way, about setting down the iron on damp cloth and scorching it forever. Every washer knew these rules. whispered like bedtime stories, all to avoid the nightmare of a ruined garment. A warm wind floats through the cracked shutters, stirring the drying lines outside. The linen flutters, crisp as parchment, while the steady hiss of the iron continues. You find the sound almost meditative, as if the centuries of repetition have burned its rhythm into the stones of Paris' self-doubt as you help fold a finished petticoat. Stiff as a soldier's shield, you think about the pride that would glow on its owner's face. To wear clean, pressed linen was to wear your respectability on your sleeve, quite literally. In a city where social climbing was a daily sport, a sharply ironed collar could be as valuable as a diamond ring. You lean against the wall, watching the final shirts being stacked in perfect piles, each one a tiny triumph of labor, knowledge, and courage. The women stand back and admire their handiwork, exchanging small jokes, ready to face tomorrow's fresh wave of dirty cloth. You realize then that ironing was never just about smoothing wrinkles. You let your gaze drift from the crisp shirts folded in neat stacks to a smaller pile nearby, less neat, less certain. A ragged cluster of underthings, socks and coarse nightshirts still damp from washing. Here is where another hidden worry lived: parasites. Even in the 18th century, lice, fleas, and other tiny pests were a constant terror. Washerwomen feared them almost as much as stains. You see one woman carefully shaking out a child's cap, searching for the telltale black specks. The wash might look spotless, but cloth was a cozy hiding place for unwelcome guests. Historians still argue whether washing alone could truly rid garments of these little invaders, or if the critters simply lay in wait to return at the first chance. There were no modern disinfectants, no high-powered dryers to roast away bugs. Heat from boiling and sun was the best defense they had, and even that was not foolproof. A laundress nearby shows you a simple trick: dusting a shirt with crushed rosemary or pennyroyal before folding it. They believe the herbs repelled lice, a natural barrier against repeat infestation. You bend down to sniff the shirt. It smells sharp and green, oddly pleasant. You want to believe it works. One apprentice carries a small clay pot of vinegar, dipping her fingers and flicking it across seams and hems. Vinegar was a go-to cure, its sourness thought to chase away fleas. You watch the droplets soak in, darkening the cloth, and wonder how many centuries people clung to that tiny hope. Some laundresses went further, suspending iron hooks near the wash lines, convinced the glint of metal would scare parasites away. Historians still debate whether that was practical or a medieval ghost story, but the washers trusted these little rituals like armor. You look around, seeing how each woman had her own method. One softly chants a prayer under her breath while, folding a blanket, another tucks sprigs of lavender into a basket. There is something touching in these small acts of protection, the way they balanced science and superstition just to keep their families safe. A fringe story you hear involves a laundress who insisted the sound of clapping two paddles together would drive away lice before clothes were folded. You smile at the image, half hoping it might even work. The city was thick with plague memories after all, and fear leaves strange marks on any culture. You help turn a nightshirt inside out, shaking the sleeves to catch any last stray insects, then lay it across a rack to finish drying in the warm breeze. The faint perfume of lavender circles around you, wrapping the cloth in its calm scent. Nearby, one woman combs through her child's shift, lifting every fold, scanning every seam. Her face is lined with worry, as if she knows that a single missed louse might mean sleepless, scratching nights. You feel that tension, a quiet dread that even the cleanest cloth could harbor hidden guests. Yet despite these fears, there is a kind of courage in the wash house. The women talk and tease each other while they work, laughing about whose child had the worst lice, trading herbs and tips, reminding each other to look under every fold. They refuse to let fear beat them down, even if the fight feels endless. As the sun shifts across the sky, drying more of the linen, you catch a sudden sparkle of tiny brass bells. One woman has sewn them to the corner of her wash basket, swearing the noise scares away fleas. You have to grin. Parisian creativity knew no limits. A breeze rustles the drying lines, snapping a freshly pressed sheet. You hear the faint chatter of the laundresses swapping stories about whose husband tracked fleas home from the wine tavern, whose dog needed a wash, whose neighbor had to burn a mattress. You stand there, letting it all sink in, breathing deep of the mingled scents: soap, vinegar, rosemary, and that unmistakable whisper of river water. It is not sweet, exactly, but it is honest, layered with centuries of human struggle against the tiniest of foes, and you marvel, once again, that these... You turn your head as a commanding voice echoes across the courtyard, drawing everyone's attention. A woman strides forward with a badge pinned proudly to her bodice, the mark of the Parisian Laundry Guild. This, dear listener, is no idol, neighborhood washerwoman, but an official member of the Guild of Blanchisses, those licensed to wash clothes for the city's wealthiest clients. The guild was more than a work club. It was a fortress of rules. Only members could legally wash and iron certain noble or wealthy linens, and only members could train apprentices in the proper method. Historians still argue whether these rules protected quality or simply guarded profit, but they certainly made the laundress a respected, even feared profession. You watch as the guild laundress inspects the basket stacked high with starched chemises and blued shifts. She runs a practiced hand across a cuff, checking the smoothness, lifting a fold, to sniff for sourness. One wrinkle out of place, one lingering hint of rot, and a laundress might lose her license. Nearby, an apprentice folds a napkin under the guild woman's hawk-like gaze, trembling slightly. The older woman nods, satisfied, and moves on, her badge catching a flash of sun like a tiny crown. You ask a local woman about it, and she tells you stories. Guilds handed down positions like family heirlooms. Sometimes you could only get in if your mother or grandmother had a place before you. A kind of family dynasty, bound by buckets and soap. The rules were strict. If you spilled water in the street, you could be fined. If you used river water from the wrong key, you might be banned for a month. If you tried to wash noble linen without guild permission, you could be hauled before the city watch. No joke. They took their clean linen very, very seriously. One fringe tale claims a laundress was once put in stocks for washing a nobleman's underclothes without permission, though historians still debate if that story is truth or tavern gossip. Either way, you can sense how carefully these rules kept power in a few calloused hands. Guild laundresses even had the right to settle disputes among themselves. A tiny court of soap queens, you might say, deciding whose spot at the river was fair, whose load was stolen, whose apprentice needed punishing. You imagine them laying down justice with dripping paddles and firm words. You see an apprentice take a clumsy step backward, nearly knocking over a stack of neatly folded petticoats. A collective gasp echoes through the courtyard, but the guild woman steps in with the speed of a hawk, catching the cloth before it hits the filthy ground. Her face stays calm, but you sense the steel in her eyes. Linen was money. Linen was pride. Linen, handled wrong, was a catastrophe. After the near disaster, the girl bows her head and starts folding again, fingers clumsy with nerves. The guild laundress gently taps her shoulder, reminding her to breathe, to respect the fabric, to trust in repetition. And the girl straightens, cheeks flushed, determination returning. You move through the courtyard, hearing bits of conversation. About guild dues and the cost of soap, about how one laundress had to pawn her iron just to pay her yearly fees. You feel a twist of sympathy. Clean linen might symbolize status. but it was a hard-won status with steep costs. An older washerwoman, retired from the guild, tells you proudly how she trained 6 apprentices who all made their way through the tests. Her eyes mist over, recalling how they each stood before the guild mistress, presented their starch sample, and waited for that final nod of approval. You stand quiet for a moment, realizing how laundry in 18th century Paris was more than buckets and soap. It was hierarchy, politics, tradition, and power. The guilds wrote those truths into every thread, every boiled sleeve, every perfectly folded sheet. As the afternoon light softens, the guild laundress makes one last round, nodding to each woman, pointing out a crooked hem here, praising a perfect pleat there. There is a pride to her posture, a steady confidence that says, Paris depends on us to keep its illusions clean. And you sense the respect in the other women's eyes, even through exhaustion. To hold a place in the laundry guild was to stand a little taller in a hard world, to know that your skill was recognized, protected, and fiercely defended. You follow the guild laundress as she moves through the courtyard, her sharp gaze missing nothing, until she comes to a wooden bench where several women sit carefully mending torn garments. Here, you discover yet another essential layer of 18th century laundry, the constant work of repair. No piece of linen was ever considered finished just because it was clean. Holes, tears, worn-out seams, these were unacceptable. You watch a woman thread a needle with pale linen yarn, hand steady despite the faint tremor of fatigue. She leans close over a ripped shift, patching it with tiny stitches so neat they practically vanish against the cloth. Historians still argue whether mending was officially part of a laundress's duty or a courtesy added to please clients, but from what you see, it is treated with the same seriousness as boiling or beating. There is no use washing what will fall apart tomorrow. A young apprentice nearby fumbles with her needle, pricking her finger and leaving a tiny red dot on a white sleeve. The gasp that goes up is sharp, and the guild laundress sweeps in to dab it away with a damp cloth before the stain can set. You see the relief on the girl's face. One careless prick could ruin a week's wages. They mend everything. Patches for worn elbows, new lace inserts to replace ragged edges, reinforcing a tear in a tablecloth that might have happened when a tipsy dinner guest toppled a wine jug. There is something loving in it, a small act of saving, of making sure each piece of cloth lives a bit longer. You notice how the older women hold their stitches in muscle memory, moving swiftly but gracefully, the thread darting through linen with the same confidence as a master tailor. It is mesmerizing to watch, a slow dance of cloth, thread, and human will. A fringe tradition you overhear is that some laundresses whispered a small rhyme with each knot, as if blessing the linen against further damage. Historians still debate whether it was a real spell or just a comforting ritual, but you can't help but smile at the idea. One woman shows you a patch on a child's smock, carefully embroidered with a tiny blue flower. For luck, she says, a bit shy. Even a ragged smock deserves something beautiful. The apprentices keep a small pile of spare linen scraps nearby, each sorted by color and weave, ready to match any tier. Nothing is wasted. Even a thread clipped from a hem might find new purpose. In patching a sleeve or reinforcing a buttonhole, you help smooth out a bit of cloth while another washer sets a patch with fine stitches, marveling at how precise she is despite the dull light. Candles gutter in the breeze, but her needle never wavers. She explains that mending was a quiet point of pride, proof that a laundress could not only clean but also preserve. One washer teases another for her crooked stitches, and they laugh. Together, gentle and warm. The courtyard feels softer in these moments, as though the day's hard labor has eased into a kind of calm. Nearby, a woman sharpens her needle on a bit of rough cloth, checking that the point is perfect for fine linen. She explains that a dull needle can tear delicate fabric worse than a broken seam. You feel a quiet respect for how she guards this tiny tool. In her world, a perfect needle is worth more than a fancy bonnet. The guild laundress passes by again, inspecting a finished patch, giving a brief approving nod. There is pride in that small gesture, a silent acknowledgement of mastery. You sense how deeply these women value that approval, how it gives them a reason to stand tall even with aching backstout as the dusk begins to slip over the courtyard. You see women gathering up the mended cloth, folding each piece as tenderly as if it were a loved one. There is something almost holy in that gesture, a final moment of respect for the days of labor that created each garment. A light breeze stirs the drying lines one last time, lifting hems and dancing along the patches. You stand back, letting that soft wind brush your face, breathing in the layered scent of soap, vinegar, and lavender. And in that quiet, you realize that these women were not just laundresses or washers. You shift closer as the last baskets of folded, mended, and starched laundry are prepared for delivery. Here unfolds another drama of 18th century Parisian life, returning the clean garments to their owners, a ritual loaded with its own risks and hidden humiliations. A pair of apprentices load armfuls of linen onto a wooden handcart, balancing towers of shirts, shifts, and tablecloths so high they look ready to topple. The guild laundress checks every name tag, carefully inked scraps of cloth sewn to collars or cuffs, because losing a noble's precious linen was worse than a crime. It was social suicide. You trail behind as they push the cart through crooked lanes, its iron-rimmed wheels rattling across cobbles. Laundry, you realize, was one of the few moments when noble and commoner crossed paths in plain daylight. The lady of the house might greet her laundress with a nod, but behind that polite veneer was a sharp eye, hunting for any stain, tear, or missing embroidery thread. One laundress tells you a cautionary tale of a noblewoman who refused to pay because a tiny scorch mark showed on her husband's ruffle. The washer had to pawn her own shawl to repay the damage. Historians still debate whether those punishments were fair or just a chance for the rich to flex their power. But the fear was reeled out at the gate of a grand townhouse. You see a laundress present a stack of snowy linen to a liveried footman. He lifts each piece, sniffing for vinegar, inspecting every pleat. You feel your stomach clench at the tension. One wrong scent, one yellow spot, and this woman's week could unravel before her eyes. The footman finally gives a stiff nod, and the laundress exhales in relief. She accepts a few copper coins, far less than the hours she invested, but she bows with dignity anyway. That is how the hierarchy worked. You smiled, you curtsied, and you swallowed your protest because another basket would come next week, and your family needed to eat. Nearby, an apprentice nearly drops a folded chemise into a puddle. The gasp from her mistress is so sharp you think she had shattered glass. She trembles, apologizes, then carefully lifts the cloth again, cheeks flushed with shame. The laundresses swap stories as they walk between houses, of clients who scolded them for wrinkles that weren't there, who demanded their linen smell, of roses instead of vinegar, who refused to pay for rain-spotted cloth even though a downpour had surprised the cart mid-journey. You watch them pass a bakery, the scent of warm bread momentarily overwhelming the sour soap clinging to their sleeves. One woman closes her eyes and inhales, savoring the sweetness. A tiny escape before facing the next high-strung noble household. A fringe belief floats through the chatter. That sprinkling rose water over folded linen before returning it might soften a noble's mood and coax a better payment. Historians still debate if it worked, but you can see why they tried. A single copper coin might feed a child, patch a roof, or buy a new needle dot at the final stop. A row of folded shirts is carried into a cramped townhouse. The lady of the house inspects them one by one, her nose twitching for any offensive scent. She finally grants a small, tight-lipped smile, dismissing the laundress with a wave of the hand. The relief in the laundress's shoulders is immediate, so deep you can feel it across the courtyard. As they return toward the washhouse, empty baskets balanced on their hips, the mood lightens. They joke again, comparing who earned the most coppers, who got the sharpest scolding, who had the luckiest breeze to dry their linen straight. There is a fragile pride in them, a knowledge that they held the fragile line between filth and respectability for the entire city. In every starched cuff and every mended hem, they carried that burden, and somehow, despite the dangers, they still laughed out as the sun sets, painting the rooftops in soft gold. You walk alongside them, hearing the rattle of the handcart echo across the stones. The day has been long, but each basket you follow the apprentices back through the twisting lanes, the empty cart rattling over uneven stones. Their chatter softens as they near the washhouse again, shoulders loosening as the weight of noble expectations falls away. But the day is not quite done yet. Now comes a ritual almost no one outside the laundress's world ever saw, the cleaning of the tools themselves. The paddles, the kettles, the soap crocks, even the battered baskets. Each one is scrubbed, dried, and carefully set aside. You might think they'd be too exhausted to bother, but a dirty tool tomorrow could ruin an entire load of precious linen. One washerwoman takes a chunk of gritty green soap, rubbing it into the wooden paddles, her knuckles working in a steady rhythm. You see that every groove and splinter holds a story, a tear from a dropped shift, a scorch from too hot water, a nick from a careless iron. These paddles are as scarred as their owners, and just as loyal. A young apprentice pours buckets of fresh water into the rinse tubs, scrubbing away clumps of old soap and sediment from the river. Her hands move automatically, practiced, like a priestess tending sacred vessels after a ceremony. You watch, oddly touched by the reverence for something so humble as a copper kettle. Historians still argue whether these scrubbing rituals were only practical or if they had a spiritual element. Some old writings suggest laundresses believed tools absorbed the bad luck or evil humors of the dirt they cleaned, and so washing them was a way to break that curse. You kind of like that idea. Another woman sharpens her sewing needle on a scrap of linen, testing its point with a tiny prick against her thumb. A perfect needle meant fewer snags and fewer costly repairs. You can see how this simple object carried more worth than its size might suggest. The older women guide the apprentices through each step, instructing them how to wrap soap to keep it dry, how to oil the iron's hinges so they wouldn't rust, how to hang up the buckets so mice didn't chew through them in the night. Their voices carry a gentle authority, passing down centuries of knowledge. Nearby, a washer tests a scrap of leftover starch, rubbing it between her fingers, checking if it has spoiled overnight. If it smells off, it must be thrown away, no matter how precious. A spoiled starch could rot a garment faster than any stain. There's a quiet moment as one laundress pours vinegar into a jar, swirling it to rinse away bits of lye before tucking it on a shelf. The tangy scent rises, cutting through the heavier perfumes of lavender and rose. Somehow, it feels clean, honest, like a final breath before tomorrow begins again. A fringe note from a guild rulebook mentions sprinkling ashes across the wash floor at night, a superstition to ward off thieves. You glance down and see faint white streaks on the flagstones, and you realize the old belief still holds power here. Better safe than sorry when a single stolen paddle could wreck someone's whole living. You help lift a drying rack against the wall, folding its wooden legs with a satisfying clack. The repetition is soothing, almost like a bedtime ritual. The washhouse seems to exhale as tools are stacked neatly, the courtyard slowly emptying of its day's chaos. One girl takes a moment to smooth her apron over her knees, removing a streak of soap with careful fingers. Even that gesture feels meaningful, a signal that she has done her duty, and can now rest. As dusk drapes over the rooftops, the washhouse transforms. The smell of boiling linen fades, replaced by a softer bouquet of damp straw, clean wood, and fading vinegar. You breathe it in, letting it calm you, and feel a kind of grateful peace. For these women, this winding down was more than cleaning up. It was a way to put the day to bed, to honor the labor they had done, to guard their small slice of pride. Until tomorrow's loads arrived again, you stand there a moment longer, listening to the clatter of buckets, the hush of folded linens, the final chatter of voices carried on the evening breeze. You step back out into the dusk as the apprentices close up the washhouse, lanterns winking on in the windows like fireflies. The air carries a calm hush, but also a soft ripple of anticipation, because tomorrow the cycle would start again, and the first loads would arrive before sunrise. Tonight, though, you follow a group of washerwomen back to their homes, trailing through lanes that twist like knotted thread. They talk quietly among themselves, sharing gossip, complaints, and the occasional laugh. One woman grumbles about a noble who tried to haggle down her price. Another jokes about dropping a chemise in the river by accident. At least it washed itself. She laughs, and they all chuckle. These walks home were their chance to trade secrets in low voices, away from customers' eyes. You lean closer, catching bits of advice, how to mend a torn gusset in a hurry, how to hide a faint scorch mark under clever pleating, how to treat chilblains from icy rinse water with goose fat. Historians still argue whether these after-hours gatherings were informal unions or simply friendships, but you sense their power either way. Here, in this walking sisterhood, no one judged the battered hands, the bruised arms, the small failings of the day. Here, they were equals, sharing the burden of Paris's dirt and dignity. They paused to rest by a water trough, dipping tired hands into the cool flow, flexing aching fingers. The water is cleaner here, fed by a well rather than the river, and the women sigh as they splash their faces, washing away a day's worth of steam, sweat, and vinegar. One apprentice teases a friend about catching the eye of a cooper's son, and a ripple of laughter passes through the group. You see them transform for a moment from laborers into something closer to schoolgirls, conspiratorial and mischievous. It's a lovely glimpse of their humanity, so often hidden behind stained aprons and sharp soap. A small fringe ritual plays out next. One woman pulls a sprig of rosemary from her pocket, waving it over her friend's head before tucking it behind her ear. For protection, she says, half serious, half playful. You smile at the gesture, charmed by this mix of superstition and sisterhood. The group breaks apart one by one as they reach their homes. Small wooden doors swing open, letting out warm candlelight and the smell of stewing cabbage or stale bread. Each washer disappears into her own world, but you can sense how these bonds will pull them back together tomorrow, ready to tackle another mountain of stained linen. You follow one older woman to a narrow alley where her granddaughter waits with wide eyes. The child throws herself into her grandmother's arms, wrinkling the fresh apron with delight. The older woman laughs, smoothing the girl's hair, telling her about the day's loads as if it were the grandest adventure. You feel your heart tighten at that tenderness. The women who washed Paris's shame were mothers and grandmothers, aunts and sisters, all carrying the legacy of those who came before. Their knowledge passed down like family treasure, more precious than any silver spoon. One washer sets her empty basket down on the step, running a finger across its worn rim, checking for new cracks. Even baskets were part of the family, after all, cared for and repaired as tenderly as a child's shift. You help her lift the basket inside, the weight now gone but the shape still heavy with memory. She thanks you with a warm smile, then closes her door against the night as you stand alone in the street. You can almost hear the echoes of their voices woven into the stone walls like a lullaby. The river keeps moving, the church bells keep tolling, but the women, these brave, practical, sharp-tongued, tender-hearted women hold the rhythm of clean and unclean, of loss and renewal. The night air smells of smoke, damp straw, and the faintest trace of lavender. You linger a moment longer in that alleyway, letting the hush settle over you. The washhouse behind you has gone dark, but its story keeps echoing, 1,000 soap-scrubbed echoes across centuries. And as you stand there, you start thinking about what happens in the seasons ahead, how each shift in the weather brings a new challenge to the laundress's daily trials. Spring, of course, is a kind of blessing. Fresh breezes, softer rains, longer days. You imagine the washerwomen smiling as they hang sheets in warm sunshine, the smell of damp linen mingling with blooming lilacs. They talk about how clothes dry faster in a sweet breeze, about how children's shift come back from the river smelling fresh instead of sour. But even spring has its trials. Sudden storms can ruin a week's work in minutes, turning starched linen to a soggy mess. Historians still argue whether medieval laundresses had tricks for predicting these storms, watching birds, maybe, or sniffing the wind. But you can picture their quick scramble to rescue the drying lines before the first drops fell. Summer, though, is where laundry truly thrives. The river runs low and lazy, the sun burns hot enough to bake starch to perfection, and the days stretch long enough to dry 2 loads instead of 1. The washerwomen grin through sunburned faces, cursing their aching shoulders but grateful for the speed of the season. There's a playful mood in summer too. Children help chase pigeons away from the drying linen, and the women share cool wine in between loads, sometimes dunking their bare feet in the river to soothe the heat. One fringe tale you hear describes a laundress who believed if she sang while washing in midsummer, her family would be protected from illness all year. Historians still debate whether that was pure wishful thinking or had some deeper folk magic. At work, then comes autumn with its creeping damp. A different enemy. The sun fades faster, leaving half-dry shirts hanging in chill twilight, and the wind carries enough dust to stick to newly washed cloth. You watch a washerwoman fuss over a drying line, swatting away falling leaves like they were enemy arrows. Autumn meant more smoke from chimney fires too, drifting across the river and settling into linen with a stubborn stink no perfume could fully erase. You picture them muttering about wood smoke, about chimney sweep soot, about children tracking mud across freshly laundered floors. The war against dirt never ended. It only changed shape with the season. Finally, winter arrives, brutal and unrelenting. The river ices up in patches, the rinse water stings like knives, and the cloth takes twice as long to dry if it dries at all. You shiver just imagining how raw their hands must feel, plunged into nearly freezing water, fighting to keep the soap from solidifying in the tub. One older washer tells you about boiling water over and over, dashing outside to rinse, then racing back to the heat before their fingers froze stiff. Historians still argue whether winter laundry even made sense. Maybe people should have simply lived with dirt for a season, but that was never an option for respectable households. You see a woman testing the ice along the river's edge with a stick, searching for a place to break it so she can dip one more bucket. The cold seems to wrap around every bone, but her expression stays firm. Paris expected its linen clean, even in snow. A fringe superstition says that if you hang linen out on a night of first frost, it will ward off evil spirits for the year ahead. You smile at that, picturing the sheets snapping in the moonlight, a banner of hope against winter's gloom. And in all these seasons, one constant remains: the women. Bent, chapped, clever, resilient. They know every quirk of the weather, every shift of the river, every angle of the sun. They adapt, they improvise, they push forward as you stand there. Letting the image of the turning year wash over you, you realize how these rhythms kept Paris moving. Clean sheets meant hospitality, meant safety, meant the dignity to face another day, whether in spring breezes or winter ice. You move through the night, letting these thoughts of the seasons roll through you, until another question takes hold: what happened to the laundry when it failed? Because, of course, not every load ended triumphantly. You see a basket hidden under a small awning, separate from the proud piles of folded white. Its contents are tragic: scorched shifts, torn sleeves, hopeless stains that refuse to yield. These were the laundry failures, and in 18th century Paris, they carried their own quiet shame. One laundress picks up a chemise with a large brown stain that looks suspiciously like wine. She sighs, explaining it belonged to a noble lady who would almost certainly refuse to pay now. You watch her rub the cloth between her fingers, as if willing it to come clean through sheer stubbornness. Historians still argue whether laundresses got any compensation for these mistakes or if they shouldered the loss alone. From what you see, it seems clear. The risk was theirs. Ruin a sleeve, scorch a tablecloth, tear a bit of lace, and you might have to pay for it from next month's bread money. One young apprentice shows you a shirt with a hole burned clean through it, the result of a moment's distraction with a too-hot iron. Her eyes shine with tears, and you ache for her. A single slip of the wrist could cost days of wages. Some of the women gathered to comfort her, telling stories of their own disasters. A petticoat boiled until it shrank to child size, a fine gentleman's ruffle stained blue from careless overbluing, a silk kerchief that simply dissolved after one rinse too many. They laugh gently about these old miseries, a grim sisterhood of mistakes. One fringe belief they share claims that sprinkling ground eggshell on scorched cloth could help restore whiteness, though historians still debate if that was science or wishful thinking. You picture them trying it anyway, desperate for any miracle. Nearby, a laundress picks apart a torn seam, hoping to patch it before morning. She works with steady hands, a quiet determination to salvage what others might abandon. You watch her. Lips move in a soft prayer as she stitches, as if invoking the cloth to forgive her, and there is a darker side to these failures. Some noble clients were so furious they accused laundresses of theft, claiming a torn shift was a switched garment or a scorched tablecloth had been replaced with a worse one. You can hear the fear in the women's voices as they describe being hauled before a city official, forced to defend their skill and honesty. One older washer tells you about a woman who was fined nearly a year's wages for supposedly stealing a gentleman's shirt, though everyone in the washhouse knew it, had simply fallen into the river. Historians still debate if these accusations were a way to control laundresses, keeping them humble, afraid. You let these stories settle inside you, a heavy burden. Laundry failures were more than inconvenience. They threatened survival. A single ruined piece could break a reputation, sink a household, destroy a woman's place in the guild. And yet, through it all, the washerwomen still tried. They scrubbed, patched, stitched, even prayed, refusing to abandon a garment until every trick was exhausted. You feel their strength, woven into those hopeless rags, a determination that seemed to say, "We will try again." You reach out to touch the torn edge of a scorched nightshirt, its cloth brittle, fragile as an old leaf. Somehow, even this failure carries its own quiet dignity. It speaks of effort, of risk, of a willingness to serve despite impossible odds. The night deepens, stars pricking through the city's haze. You stand by the basket of failed laundry, thinking how each cloth tells its own story, not just of stains and soap, but of women who refused to give up on it, who refused to give up on them. You stand with that basket of failures still on your mind as the night draws fully in. a velvet dark wrapping around the old stones of Paris. The washhouse grows quiet, the last lantern snuffed out, the courtyard empty except for a stray cat. Sniffing along the flagstones. And here, in this hush, you begin to understand something deeper about these laundresses. They were more than workers scrubbing away dirt. They were keepers of ritual, guardians of respectability, holding up the fragile illusion that a person's worth could be measured in white linen and stiff collars. You think back over all the tiny gestures you've seen, the careful folding of a shift, the testing of starch between calloused fingers, the hush before an iron-touched cloth, the sprinkling of vinegar to chase away lice. These moments are stitched together like a tapestry, each one carrying a quiet magic born of centuries. One washer returns to the courtyard, carrying a small candle. She sets it on the stone ledge and whispers a prayer to the Virgin Mary, a tiny "Thank you for surviving another day without burning a sleeve or tearing a hem." You watch the flame tremble in the breeze, fragile and bright, like her hope. Historians still argue whether these prayers were superstition or true devotion, but you sense they were both, a mingling of faith and fear that gave these women courage to face another sunrise. Nearby, an apprentice carefully sets her soap paddle beside the door, arranging it just so. You see her smooth the handle with a loving thumb, almost like a farewell to a friend. There is tenderness here, even toward a wooden tool. As the night deepens, the scents soften, a ghost of lavender, a tang of vinegar, a hint of fresh starch, all mingling into something strangely soothing. You breathe in, letting that sleepy Paris perfume calm your heart. You catch a glimpse of the river beyond the courtyard wall, moonlight dancing over its black surface. This same river that carried filth away also fed their work, connecting them to every household, every scrap of lace, every wedding gown, every child's nightshirt. One woman steps forward, humming softly as she gathers up a child's small linen cap, folding it with impossible care. You realize that this isn't just about cleaning clothes, it is about protecting memories, preserving dignity, giving each person the chance to face a harsh world with a bit of pride. A breeze lifts up, drying sheets still pinned to the line, making it billow like a ship's sail for a moment before falling still. You smile at the image, thinking that in its own way, laundry was a voyage too, a journey from filth to freshness, guided by the steady hands of these women. Tomorrow it will begin again. The guild mistress will arrive with a new basket of stained garments. The apprentices will roll up their sleeves, the kettles will bubble, the paddles will smack linen, and the cycle will repeat. But for tonight, there is peace. A candle burns low. The last cloth is folded. The washhouse is quiet. And you stand there, in that calm, breathing with them, knowing their legacy is bigger than soap or starch. It is written into the hidden corners of every city, wherever. People yearn to be clean, dignified, and respected. As you turn to leave, you feel the warmth of their resilience settle on you like a cloak. The sense that even the smallest, humblest tasks matter. That somewhere between the vinegar rinse and the lavender sachet, these laundresses changed more than clothes. They changed history, stitch by stitch, load by load, day by day. Now, let your breathing slow, deeper, softer, each breath a gentle wave rolling across your mind. Picture the candle flame flickering low on the washhouse ledge, its light dancing over folded linen, casting long, peaceful shadows against the stone. Let the hush of night wrap around you, the river's murmur. In the distance, the faint echo of a washerwoman's lullaby still woven through the air. Feel the scent of lavender and soap carried on a night breeze, soothing you with a promise of calm. You might imagine your own hands, a little chapped perhaps, but strong and steady, setting down a soap paddle after a long day's labor. Let that simple action remind you that your work is enough, that every small effort matters. No matter who sees it. Sense the city sleeping beyond the courtyard walls, carriages gone quiet, candles fading behind shutters, and know that peace has settled across the stones. You can rest here, just like the linen resting on its drying rack, knowing you have made it through another day. Let each detail soften in your mind: the faint hiss of an iron, the rhythm of paddles against cloth, the laughter of apprentices, the steady beat of your own heart. In this quiet moment, you are safe. You are warm. You are allowed to let go. Close your eyes, if you wish, and drift toward sleep, carried on centuries of gentle hands and centuries of stories.